handout for the end. I'm not going to give it to you right away because you'll be reading it and not listening to me. So anyway, well, happy to be here. Thank you for asking me. Some of you were at church Sunday and you saw that they rounded me up to do a lay talk. If the word gets out, you can talk. First time they asked me, I thought, well, that's quite an honor. They've recognized my sterling talents, And then after a while, I found out that everybody else had already done it or been asked and said no, and I was the last guy. So, Anyway, this time I think I was the first guy for this session. Yeah, my name is John Hunkler, and I might start with a little prayer if you don't mind. Heavenly Father, bless this gathering. Holy Spirit, be our guide. Guide the message that is given and the message that is received. In your holy name, amen. Not a big prayer, just short prayers. I don't think God needs very big prayers, I don't know. So anyway, this, I want to say at the outset that for some of you, one or more of you, this could be one of the most important hours you've ever spent. And I want to tell you why, because my topics are alcoholism, drug addiction, recovery from alcoholism, drug addiction, and faith. Wish me luck in putting that all together, right? The reason I can speak with some authority on several of those subjects is because I am a recovering alcoholic and drug addict. And as a matter of fact, I started that journey a long time ago. In fact, I'm going to pass this coin around that I recently received for my 52nd year of 12-step recovery. So I'll just pass that around. I was at a meeting the other night when they gave it to me, and they were talking about the Olympics, and they were talking about Olympic gold, and I said, I got my gold medal. So anyway, pass that around. That's a 52-year chip, they call it. They don't start with nice chips like that. You usually start with plastic ones, and then eventually you get the brass. And anyway, because the reason this might be an important hour for you is because what I'm going to talk about might affect you, or it might affect some of your family in the future, or it may even be affecting your family now. It could be a relative, a parent, a sibling. My origin, I came from a family farm, a lot like some of you people, just about directly north of here. If you go from Napoleon and go east towards Streeter, there's some hills, and then beyond that is the flat. We had a farm out there nestled in the hills. And I grew up a little farm boy, one of 10 kids, good Catholic family. And I was the 7th of 10 kids, and of course by the time they got to me, everybody had done the genius and scholar and all the good stuff, so I kind of had to do a different shtick, so I kind of turned out to be the troublemaker. One of the reasons I was a troublemaker, I think, is I blame my older brothers. They were a pretty bad influence on me. They hated authority, they hated the direction of my parents, and since I was this big, they were indoctrinating me, so it wasn't their fault. They just, were rascals and kind of anti-authoritarian, and I kind of learned that. It's no wonder when I went to St. Philip's Catholic School, which they had in those days, I went there 8 years. It had teaching by, I was going to say indoctrination, teaching by the nuns, and almost from day one I was in trouble. I could never understand why. It's kind of because I didn't like authority, and I think authority figures pick up on that pretty fast. So I was a little bit of a troublemaker. Another thing that happened in my experience, I don't know if it happens in this town, but in that town, there was a little difference between the country kids and the city kids. The city kids were kind of cool, and they had the nice threads to wear and stuff like that. And we were just kind of dumb farm kids. We weren't that dumb, but they kind of convinced us we were. And I always felt a little out of place because I didn't quite fit in. My family, I thought we were poor. It turned out we weren't, because my dad gave a bunch of money to charity when he died, but he was a product of the Depression, and he never spent money on anything he didn't have to. So every fall we'd get nobody's old enough to relate to this, but we'd get a big old box from Sears Roebuck in the fall, and every one of us kids would get 2 pairs of jeans and 2 shirts to wear to school. And because you might grow, the jeans, you had to roll them up a couple times, and Anyway, we weren't so poor or anything like that. We always had plenty of things to wear and plenty of food and all that kind of a thing, but we weren't cool kids, you know. Went to town and I always felt a little bit different because, you know, I just wasn't quite one of the cool ones. And so I felt different because I got in trouble. I felt different because we were country kids and we weren't the cool kids. I felt bad about myself also because I started getting in trouble when I started going away to school, and I was, you know, they convinced me. The nuns never got through to me about my behavior. I remember my report card in those days, they had a line in the report card that said dealings with others. And I didn't even know what the heck that meant, but I always got low grades in it. And you know, they never explained to me, you know, John, if you do this or that, you get better grade in dealings with others. They just kept giving me bad grades. I didn't know why that was. I was just being me, you know. And well, you know, some of the classic things that I got in trouble for, like at the 8th grade banquet, me and another kid got caught spiking the punch. You know, they had a little gathering with the 7th and 8th graders, and the sheriff came down. That didn't go across too well. But I really wasn't in trouble with drinking or anything like that. I will say that I went away to high school. They sent us away to these boarding schools, and I went to Assumption Abbey in Richardson, North Dakota. And a couple times a year they would have, it was an all-boys school, and they would have a dance with the girls' school across town, St. Mary's. And I went to that girls' dance at the girls' school, and I was afraid to ask the girls to dance. Can you imagine that? None of you guys would ever have that kind of trouble, I'm sure, you know. But I was shy. I was an introvert, if you know what that means. Kind of kept to myself, and one year my older brother came out for homecoming, and he bought me a pint of blackberry brandy. And I remember slugging about half of that pint down, and I had courage. I could go across the floor and ask any girl to dance. In fact, I was a great dancer. I'd never danced before in my life, but you get enough blackberry brandy and you can dance pretty good, you know. And I thought, this is the answer to my shyness, to my lack of confidence. Somehow I had some kind of a special reward from having a drink, and having more than one drink, of course. I think I got sick on that stuff. I never drank it again. It was horrible stuff, really. I mean, but it had alcohol in it. What I found when I drank alcohol is it gave me a lift, and it kind of took me out of my shyness and all that. One of the things that was different about my drinking that I'll tell you about shortly, symptoms of alcoholism, and that is that when I started drinking, I wanted more. I had the disease of more, I guess you could call it. 1 or 2 drinks, 3 or 4, whatever was available, I just drank. And you know, I'm sure you're all pure and innocent. You've never done anything like this, but just in case. One day I crossed the line into alcoholism, and I didn't know it. And that's one of the reasons that I'm here talking to all of you, because I want you to know, I want you to be at least basically educated about what happens. It's not the kind of thing that I sat down one day and said, I think I'll be an alcoholic when I grow up, you know. I had an uncle that was an alcoholic. He came to our farm when I was about this tall, and he was shaking so bad he couldn't hold a cup of coffee. And I always remember that was my image of alcoholism, that Uncle Roland, if I ever got that bad, I'd quit, you know. Well, he'd been at it about 40, 45 years, so he was pretty wasted. He almost died in Skid Row in San Francisco, and my parents got him to come back to our farm and dried him out. And so I knew what an alcoholic looked like, a real alcoholic, and I also knew that it was possible to not be an alcoholic anymore, or to recover from alcoholism. So anyway, let me talk to you. I crossed the line into alcoholism, and I want to give you a definition of alcoholism that might make sense to you. A simple way to explain alcoholism, and I'll give you a copy of this afterwards. Alcoholism isn't about being a bad person. It's about a brain and body that react differently to alcohol than most people. I didn't know that was me. For some people, when they take a drink, something changes. Instead of feeling satisfied after 1 or 2, they feel a strong craving for more. And once they start, it becomes very hard to stop. The only thing that stopped me is there wasn't availability. You know, I mean, nobody bought me a case of beer and said, have at it. There were a couple times when I had access and I could have poisoned myself. Over time, the brain begins to depend on alcohol to feel normal, not even to feel good, just to feel okay. That's when it becomes a disease. And I needed it to socialize. That's kind of the way I got. It affects their thinking, their choices, their relationships, and their ability to be the person God created them to be. And the tricky part, you usually can't tell at first who has that vulnerability. Many alcoholics didn't plan to become one. I would say almost all alcoholics didn't plan to become one. I've never met anybody that said I aspired to be an alcoholic when I grew up. They just discovered too late that their body and brain were wired differently. Or to frame it in 3 parts, number 1, it changes the brain. Alcohol affects the reward system in the brain. For some people, that reward switch gets stuck in the on position. Number 2, it creates craving. Most people can stop. An alcoholic often cannot, not because they don't want to, but because the craving is powerful. 3, it becomes bigger than willpower. This is very important. It's not just about trying harder, it becomes physical, mental, and spiritual. Alcoholism isn't about how much you drink, it's about what happens when you drink. And then again, addiction shrinks your world. Faith opens it back up. That's how I'll get around to faith. Recovery isn't just about quitting something, it's about becoming who God always meant you to be. So that's a little bit of a definition of alcoholism. And since you couldn't probably remember all that, I'll send a copy of that home with you. Truth of the matter is, somewhere along the line, I crossed the line into alcoholism. And the bad news is, once you cross that line, you never go back. You can't. It's kind of like making a cucumber into a pickle. You never can make that pickle back into a cucumber. So I didn't even know it. I just thought I was having fun, every social setting. Now, we happen to live in German-Russian communities where a lot of drinking goes on, right? I'm sure that some of you observed that. Some of you probably. I grew up in Napoleon. I think they even drink more than they do here. And so go to dances or go to weddings or whatever, there's quite a bit of drinking going on. And for a lot of people, you can drink and have a few and leave it alone. For people like me, I got to the point of where once I started, I just didn't quit till the booze was gone, to tell you the truth. I remember visiting cousins in California, and they were party boys. And after a little while, after I was there, I think it was before I turned 21, I realized that I wasn't quite as welcome at their house, and after I sobered up, I was talking to them about it, and they said, well, heck yeah, we didn't want you to hang around. You drank all our booze, I mean, I was just a party boy. Well, the thing that happened to me, I happened to be in an era where drugs were starting to become prevalent, and if I told you how long ago that was, you'd think, what's that old guy doing here, but it was actually in the 1970s, early 1970s, and the drugs were coming to Napoleon, and Napoleon was a very progressive town in terms of drugs, to put it that way. I found out that if I mixed some drugs with the booze, I could get a particularly good high. And boy, I'll tell you, that's a prescription for disaster if there ever was one. Even today, you don't even know what the heck you're getting with the street drugs, and back in those days, I think it was worse, although we didn't have fentanyl in those days. So I eventually had such bad behavior, believe it or not. I made it through grade school, only got busted once for drinking. Went to a boarding school and got kicked out of the first one, and then I went to the second one in Minnesota and got kicked out of there. You'd think I'd learn, Not very fast. I went to public school in Napoleon for my last year and a half. And there you could pretty freely drink and party on the weekends, and there wasn't much trouble to be had as long as you could make it home, I thought that, there were so many of us that kind of had this attitude. On Monday morning, we'd get together in the boys' room and we'd talk about our weekend, and it was kind of whoever had the best escapade trying to get home. We thought that drinking and driving was a sport, honest to God. And a matter of fact, me and my neighbors, folks never let us go into town for sports or anything like that, so we didn't have much integration that way, but I had a couple of neighbors that were really good at, we'd get a case of beer and we'd go out hunting rabbits. Well, after you get a couple of beers in, you know, them rabbits are so safe. I swear to God, we couldn't hit a single one of them, you know, with shotguns or anything. But boy, we had a good time out there. I should have known there was a problem when my mother said to me one time, she said, looked at me, and I thought it was so clever, and I hid my drinking and everything. And my mother looked at me and said, John, can't you guys ever go out and have a good time without drinking? It's like, what? How did you know? Well, mothers know, let me tell you. Don't even try to sneak past a mother. Anyway, drugs multiplied the effect. I did a lot of driving while intoxicated. Let me tell you, that's a very serious matter. I swear to God, they still take that far too lightly in these towns. We live around the corner from a bar, and we hear doors slamming at 2 a.m. when people are heading home. You know they weren't in there eating T-bone steaks till 2 o'clock in the morning. And you know what? They're getting in their car and driving. I think it's a disaster. I didn't take it seriously. I drove hundreds or thousands of miles drunk and stoned. And one day, by the way, because I was so anti-authoritarian and I was breaking all the rules, and I was raised with good Catholic grounding, good conscience and everything. Well, when I started drinking, man, I'll tell you what, I tried to shut that conscience off because I didn't feel good. I felt guilt, I felt shame. Finally got so bad that my father kicked me off of the farm. Can you imagine having a nice Catholic family and 10 kids in your family, and besides there was aunts and uncles that were priests and nuns, and a brother or two that was a priest, and a couple nuns that were sisters, and then there's me, right? Well, my behavior got so bad that my father basically invited me to hit the road. I stole a duffel bag from one of my Army brothers, stuffed it full of my stuff, went out hitchhiking. Back in those days, you could safely do that. You could hitchhike. So I hitchhiked across the country, and I went and visited friends and stuff. And I thought I was living the high life, you know, no rules, no regulations, party time. A couple of years of that, I ended up in California. I had a job or two. I got fired from several jobs. I didn't even realize these were markers, you know, that this was not trending in the right direction. I just thought I was having a good time. I was young and I was cocky, and I thought, you know, heck with that job. I'll get another one tomorrow when I want to, and I usually could. Well, I came back for Christmas in 1973. This tells you how far back I go. And I remember sitting on my family farm, and I was kind of wiggy because I had been drinking pretty much daily and doing other stuff. And that's something that you did not do on my family farm. You did not sit around and drink, if you know what I'm saying. And I remember feeling pretty squirrely about that, and not even knowing that there was a pretty good chance I was having some pretty significant withdrawals from addiction. Later that month, my father always thought that I was going to be the one boy that was going to stay home and take over the farm. And he had given me a couple head of cattle, and you know, those had calves and stuff. And so I had a few head of cattle, and I decided in my infinite wisdom that January, it was a cold January day, I said, you know, Dad, I don't think I want to do this farming thing. And he always had an agreement with me that if I ever wanted to sell my head of livestock, that I would sell it to him. So I said, I'm done. I'm going to cash out. So he honored his deal. He gave me the money for the few head of cattle I had, and I went off to party to Fargo with my brothers. I had two brothers that were in Fargo. Believe it or not, they were both going to Cardinal Minch Seminary. Ever hear of the place when they used to have it? They were studying to be priests. What do? I go to Fargo, pick up my oldest, slightly older brother, and we went down to the bar and proceeded to party. And we're sitting at the bar, and you know, I have other stuff in my system, so I can drink a lot. My brother is like, you know, by mid-afternoon, he's ready to fall off the stool. He pulls this letter out from my mother, and it's a very gracious, you know, mothers, they love you no matter what. I mean, and he whipped this letter out, and I read this letter from my mother, and she said to my brother, Frank, she said, you know, we're convinced that John is an alcoholic. Boom. I'd never been confronted with that before. I had no idea. And I knew that my mother knew because her brother was an alcoholic, that uncle that came out to the farm when I was this big. And she was very gracious about it. She said when he's in the throes of, when he's drinking, he isn't really responsible for his behavior. She was so very kind. But the truth just slammed me, and it's like, whoa, man. So my brother was ready to fall off the bar stool, so I took him back to seminary, picked up my other brother, and we partied. And we partied all night. We had some people we knew from Napoleon. We went over to their place, and I don't even know what went on that night. But because of that truth that I had been smacked with, I really let her rip. I came to the next morning. See, what happens if you drink enough, eventually you start to black out. I don't know if you've ever had the experience, but when you start blacking out and you don't remember the night before. In high school, we would talk about that, and it's like, if you couldn't remember the night before, it was a particularly good party, right? That is a blackout. It's a very serious matter. When you start blacking out, you're actually killing brain cells. See, if I get dingy today, I blame it on the dead brain cells, but anyway. I came to the next morning, and everybody from the party had gone, and there I am by myself, and I went out to get in my truck. Ain't no truck. So I started to, I called up my brother at the seminary, and I said, I don't know where my truck is. He said, I don't know where it is either. So he said, I'll be over. So he came over, and it took us half the morning around Fargo to find my truck. So now, when you start blacking out, you can't remember the night before, you can't find your vehicle the next day, you got a problem, you know what I'm saying? So it was a cold January day, January 31st, 1974. That was 52 years ago this January. I decided that Fargo was not good for me. I better go to Bismarck and see my new girlfriend. I'm driving to Bismarck. I'm about halfway there, and I went driving in the blackout, I swear, but I came to just enough. I was west of Jamestown. You know where those big white tanks are? You ever seen those? And I looked down my gas gauge, and I realized I wasn't going to make it with the gas, so I decided to turn around. Well, I turned around, tried to go over the overpass, and I didn't quite make it, and I ended up going down in the ditch on that steep embankment. And I was in snow about this deep. I really wasn't too worried because I had a half a gallon of wine for the trip and a box full of other dry goods that I mentioned earlier. And I was so messed up that I didn't even realize it was 30 below that day, by the way. Farmer came along, knocked on the window, and said, do you need some help? And I said, tow truck, you know. And sure enough, a little while later, a knock came on the window, and it was what we call HP, which in AA stands for higher power, also stands for highway patrol. So there was a highway patrol. Anyway, long story short, he hauled me into jail. Did a breath test. Anybody that knows anything about it, you probably would know 0.35 alcohol in my system. 0.5 is dead. 0.35 should have been in a hospital or, you know, dry out ward or something, and they couldn't even measure the drugs that were in me. Anyway, bottom line, they put me in jail, and that night I almost died, I swear. Because coming off cold turkey from booze and drugs and all that other stuff, I had a very, 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 very difficult night, and I did not know for sure if I was going to make it through the night. I came to the next day, and I had one of those spiritual moments that happens in everybody's life when you look back on it. And I realized, first thing I realized is that I was a freedom-loving, kind of a hippie lifestyle, you know, do whatever you please, and here I am sitting behind bars, and I said to myself, this is not what I intended. I don't like this, you know. The bars are in front of you, the door is locked, you can't go out. That did not sit very well with me. And I realized that I put myself there because, see, prior to that, a lot of things that happen to alcoholics, they always blame everybody else. It's the authorities, it's the law, it's all the stupid things that people do that make my life miserable. For once, I took responsibility for my own situation. I put myself in jail. That's number one. That was a spiritual moment, and I didn't even recognize it. Second thing is, my mother had been trying to get my Uncle Roland to come and talk to me on the farm because she wanted him to help me understand my problem. And every time Uncle Roland would come down to visit with me, I would be gone. Guess who lived in Jamestown, North Dakota, where I ended up in jail? Uncle Roland. Little God wink. So who do I call? I figured Uncle Roland will commiserate with me. He'll understand my problem, you know. Well, he certainly did. Came down, visited with me in jail, and I told him my story, and he looked at me and he says, Johnny, he said, you're headed down the same path I was headed down. He said, you're just a little bit younger. You still have your health. He didn't know how much damage I had done up here with all the stuff I'd been using. And I said, what do I do, Uncle Roland? And he said, I think you need to go and get an evaluation. So I went, he said, either go to St. John's in Fargo or Heartview in Mandan. And my girlfriend lived in Bismarck, so I said, okay, I'll go down there. Long story short, I went and got an evaluation. And if you ever have an evaluation as an alcoholic, you know what you do, you lie. Yeah, she asked how much I drank, and I lied about that. Well, they know you lie, so. And I didn't even tell her about the drugs I've been doing. And she was very kind and very gentle, because this is what I really needed at that point. And she said to me, she said, I can't tell you you're an alcoholic. Here's 12 questions. And I flunked them all, lied about the rest, whatever. She said, I want to challenge you. I said, what's that? She said, I want you to quit drinking for 6 months. And I had another spiritual moment that I recognized later on. A moment of honesty. And inside my head, I'm thinking, I could never do it. I knew that I couldn't quit by myself. Well, fortunately, I had a few bucks in the bank, and I had no insurance or anything, but treatment. I had said, how much does it cost to go in here? She told me, and I knew I had enough money to cover it. I said, I better go now while I have the money. So I checked myself into treatment the next day, and I had a fabulous, I hated it, by the way. Who wants to be an alcoholic, number one? Number two, who wants to be in an institution to be treated for it? And I'll tell you the very thing that happened to me during that, it was supposed to be a 6 to 8 week stay. Unfortunately, they kicked me out after 30 days. You see a pattern here? Just about everything I'd ever been in, I got kicked out of. What I realized when I was there is I went through a complete series of lectures, and I was thoroughly educated about the disease of alcoholism. I could no longer deny that I had a problem. I could no longer fool myself that maybe it's not that bad. Maybe if I change drinks, any of this craziness that alcoholics go through. I knew that I was an alcoholic, and I knew that I had a permanent disease, and I knew that I was going to have to do something about it, or it would probably kill me. They kicked me out of the place because I was still defiant. I was still anti-authoritarian. I didn't let the counselor get into me, into my soul. And it turns out that God uses even those kinds of things to save our lives. I got out of there. I was going to go and get good and drunk and get even with them, and then I decided that I would get good and even with them by staying sober. And that's what I did. I also had a court case coming up on the drugs that I had on me, and I know that was coming up a couple months later. And I had lost my driver's license because of the DUI, so I'm stuck on the farm, 12 miles out of town. I'm waiting for the court case, and I thought, it would look good if I'd say I went to treatment, but then they'd probably know that I got kicked out, so that isn't going to fly too well. Then Doc Goodman, I don't know if you ever heard the name, but he used to come down here many, many years ago, Wishick Hospital. He was a very prominent citizen, a very, very good man, but he's dead today, so I can break his anonymity. He was an alcoholic and a drug addict. My mother went in to see him one day, and I guess she was telling him how squirrely I was getting out there on the farm. And old Doc Goodman says, why don't you have John come in and join us for AA? Huh, wow. When a prominent individual invites you to something, you go, hey, that's pretty cool. Besides, I got out of farm work. Any of you guys farmers here? If you have an excuse to get out of farm work about 6 o'clock on a summer day, woo! So, we have mixed motives for things. I went into AA, and there's a bunch of old buzzards sitting around. I was 21 years old. And these guys are probably 2 or 3 times my age, and I'm thinking to myself, boy, I don't think I'm going to have a thing in common with these guys. And it turned out that I had a lot in common with them, as a matter of fact. It took me a while to really get into it, but they had a meeting once a week, whether you needed it or not. And you know what happened when I went to my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting? Number one, they treated me with respect and dignity. Even though I didn't deserve it, they still treated me with respect and dignity. And they invited me to keep coming back. Every week I thought, what's with these guys? Are they trying to pitch me on some Amway thing or something like that? I mean, they were so nice to me. I thought, they gotta have an angle in this. You know what I found out their angle was? They got to stay sober by helping me. And I didn't understand it, but today I do. I really understand it a lot, so I'll talk about that. Also, as I started going to those meetings, guess what happens? The first meeting I'm at, they start reading a little bit of literature and there's a whole bunch of God stuff. Well, I didn't tell you, I had dumped God. You know, the God I grew up with was kind of a score-keeping, butt-kicking God, and I didn't want another part of that. That's one of the reasons I drank. I was so guilty. You see, what they never taught me, or they may have taught me and I never got it, they never taught me about that gentle, loving, kind, has my best interests at heart God. I never learned about that God. And that's one of the reasons I'm here to talk to you about it tonight. But I kept going to those meetings. Eventually I went to Bismarck and I went to more meetings, and I started listening to people that I kind of admired. They kind of had what I wanted. And some of them, once in a while, they talk about God of kindness and a God of love and a God of help with their disease of alcoholism. Every once in a while I'd listen to one of them and I'd say, I kind of like that. Maybe I'll take that bit for myself. I didn't realize that the guy in treatment had, he had kind of foretold that. I had a counselor in treatment before they kicked me out, and one day, you know, he was looking at me and he said, you know what your trouble is, John? You threw the baby out with the bathwater. And I'm thinking, what the heck does that have to do with staying sober? I didn't have no baby or bathwater. And he said, no, you don't understand. He said, you didn't like some of the things that you were taught growing up about religion, so you threw the whole works out the window. And I'm thinking, well, he's probably right about that. And then he said, you know what's going to happen is, he said, you're going to go back every once in a while and you're going to look at that pile of stuff you threw out, and you're going to pick one of them up and you're going to say, I think I'll keep that one for myself. And that's exactly what happened. I listened to people that had a message that resonated or fit for me, and I would look at that and I'd say, you know what that guy said right there? A little snippet of God talk. I think I'll keep that one for myself. And to tell you the truth, that's how I started rebuilding a faith that I probably never had. I probably never had it as a kid. You know, you go to First Communion, confirmation, all this stuff, and all these kids that get this little grace glow and all this stuff. I always thought, man, I must miss the boat because I don't feel nothing, you know. It's like, you just go through the motions, and I never caught the God thing. And when I was in Alcoholics Anonymous long enough, I started really understanding that the only way I was going to be able to continue to stay sober is if I had some help. The help initially was other fellows and women in Alcoholics Anonymous. But eventually I began to realize that what the people in Alcoholics Anonymous gave to me was the love of God through them. That's how this thing works. And today I'm an ardent Alcoholics Anonymous member. I've been in AA for 52 years, as you saw with a beautiful coin. My lovely bride is also in Alcoholics Anonymous. We were in bigger cities where they had a lot of meetings, and we could go sometimes every day. And you go, why would you want to go to AA every day? Because it's such a beautiful way of life. It's like I've rebuilt my life, and I rebuilt my life with faith, with the God of my understanding, of God that I could feel good about, that I didn't feel guilty about all the time. And that's one of the primary messages I wanted to share here tonight. You know, you're all young and you have your life in front of you, and these good people are trying to, and your parents are trying to give you a good foundation with perhaps a good setting for faith and belief in God and all that. I don't know if you were here a couple of years ago when I talked to the senior graduating class, but you know what? When you graduate and you get out and you're on, all of a sudden it's like, woohoo, man, I don't have all those restrictions, I don't have those rules and regulations. You know what? If you don't have a good firm foundation with your faith, you might be in trouble, like I was. I threw it all out the window on purpose, but there's a lot to be said. I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't gone to AA and found a God of my understanding. I would not. And even though I was a renegade Catholic, you might even call me like a sort of a fallen away Catholic, I got married my first year of sobriety. I'm not ashamed to say today that I had no business getting married because I didn't know anything about having a proper relationship with anybody. All my friends were getting married, so I thought, hey, this is the thing to do, you know? I didn't have any relationship skills. In fact, because of my alcoholism and drug addiction, they say your maturity stops when you start drinking. Well, heck, I started drinking when I was about 15 years old. So when I married at 21, I was probably emotionally a 15-year-old. It didn't work out very well. We were bullheaded Germans, and we didn't know how to solve problems, and there was a whole lot of stuff that went on. And after 7 years, we couldn't make it any further, and brought more shame to the family by being the first person ever to get divorced. And you know what? Back in those days, the Catholic Church didn't think very well of that. And that kind of ended the shtick for me. If the church didn't want to have anything to do with me, I didn't want to have anything to do with the church. Now, I think that's changed a lot, but it wasn't that way in those days. So I had my spirituality in Alcoholics Anonymous, and as time went on, my faith started to grow, and some very interesting things happened. As time went on, I'll compress the story just a little bit. I meet this young lady here, and we started hanging out together, and one day we were driving across Texas with our RV, and out of the blue, she was raised Episcopalian, which is kind of like Catholic light, but they don't do rosaries and stuff like that, you know. She says to me, so how do you pray the rosary? It's like, what? Where did this come from? I wasn't going to church, and she wasn't going to church, and all of a sudden she starts asking about the rosary. And so I got to New Orleans, and I had my brother there give her a little tutorial on how to pray the rosary, you know, and stuff like that. And that summer we got up here, we were staying at my brother's retirement home before he retired down in Napoleon. And Kristen says, I'd like to know a little more about the Catholic Church, you know? And it's like, oh man. So we said, well, let's call up Father, you know, whatever the heck his name was in those days, Father Pfeiffer. Called him up and said, Kristen wants to know a little more. So we went down and visited with him. He says, tell you what, I'll give you personal, what do they call it? RCIA classes. That's how much I know about it, you know. And he said, I'll give you personal lessons this summer. Usually you have to wait for the rotation and go in with the group and stuff like that. So I thought to myself, you know, I'm being very frank with you here. So if you think less of me for, you know, having not gone to church for that time, whatever, I still have a strong message for you. I said, well, you know, it's been a long time since the nuns taught me. Maybe I ought to go to the classes myself. So both Kristen and I went in and took the entire series that summer with Father Pfeiffer. And you know, I learned a lot. You know, when you're young, you think you know it all, or you think you learned everything, and the truth of the matter is you don't. So I had a very A to Z class with Kristen about the Catholic Church, and we got all done with that. And she says, I'd like to be a Catholic. What? So she decided to get baptized, or you were baptized already. You got confirmation, communion, confession. And next thing you know, it's like both of us had a disappointment with the previous marriage. And we said, we ain't never getting married again, okay? I might scandalize y'all. We were, you know, not married. And so we started talking to the Father about if we wanted to get married in the church. Now I'm convinced that my mother was a very serious Mother Mary acolyte. My grandmother was. I have sisters that are not, all these holy people around me. I swear to God, there's some of those in heaven. My mother particularly, I think she was working overtime for us. Because we had to go through this long, drawn-out thing about squaring away our previous marriage and all that sort of thing. And eventually we got the whole thing squared away, and we got married in the Catholic Church. And we started going to church. And so here I am, basically, you might have thought I was a pagan, you know. I never really was. I believed in God, but I just didn't have the proper foundation, I guess. And today, the Catholic Church means a lot to me. We always go to church. We always do the best we can to be good Catholic citizens, or whatever the heck you want to call us, and I guess that is proven by the point that I'm here talking to you about God as a tried and true Catholic today. And you know, we may have some making up to do and catching up to do and that sort of thing, but nothing could be more important to me today than my faith. You see, I did learn about a God of kindness and gentleness, and all that God ever wants for us. You know, He created every single one of us. And I don't care what message you got, I'm telling you right now, He values every one of us. He always wants us to do well. He wants us to thrive and grow. And you know, primarily, I guess my message today is, you know, take this thing seriously. There are going to come times in life. In my 52 years of sobriety, I've had some serious ups and downs. I've had financial ups and downs. I've had job ups and downs. I've had deaths. I mean, my first wife passed away, and family deaths and parents. And I've had two sisters that have passed in the last couple of years. And there's nothing more important than my faith today. You might say, yeah, well, you get to be an old codger. Maybe that's important. No, it's important always. I wished I had somebody that could have talked to me like this when I was your age. I maybe would have taken it a little more seriously. I'm going to say something, I don't want to tick anybody off, but when I did a graduation talk a couple years ago, all of a sudden there's people in the front row I had never seen it before. It's like, what happened? Where did these kids come from? I kind of think that there's a little bit of a thing in some of these small towns. You get to be a teenager, I guess you don't have to go to church anymore. Well, let me tell you something. I think you're missing out. I really do. And I respect just about every one of you I've seen in church, so it's cool. I'm not criticizing. All I can say is that you're going to find a time in your life when your faith is going to be really, really important. It's going to carry you through when nothing else will. And I want to tell you something else. Any of you who are aspiring to be married someday, if you don't have faith at the center of your marriage, you're probably going to have a very hard time. Or let me put it in a positive way, it's going to be a lot easier if you have that. You're now family members. Every family has problems. If God is at the center of your family life, if you go to church together, you pray together and stuff like that, I got to tell you, there's a whole lot easier to work things out in life. It's a whole lot easier. Anyway, that's a little bit about my walk of faith. I think you know how, from what I'm saying, how important it is. Let me talk to you just a little bit about Alcoholics Anonymous. If you ever find yourself in a situation, this is some statistics about alcoholism, drug addiction. The U.S. now has a federal survey estimate for adults who say they're in recovery or have recovered from drug or alcohol problems. 23.5 million U.S. adults 18 plus consider themselves in recovery or recovered in 2024 from alcohol and or drugs. 23.5 million. Important nuance, that recovery number is not alcohol only, it's alcohol and or drugs, self-identified recovery. The U.S. alcohol problem size, 27.9 million people aged 12 plus had alcohol use disorder. They're now tracking that, self-identified. How many AA meetings or groups are there? I told you I would start going to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm telling you, I would not be here today if it wouldn't be for AA. Kristen and I started to come back here in the summertime, and we started going to the meetings, and they weren't very strong because people would come in the summer and there would be pretty good meetings, and then we'd go south in the winter. That was the case in Napoleon. It was the case in Wishick, even though they still had a meeting. And Kristen and I feel so strongly about giving back to Alcoholics Anonymous that we decided at one point, we had a place in Sun City, and I had a business in Florida. And at some point about 3-4 years ago, we decided we needed to come back here and help anchor these two meetings in Napoleon and Wishick full-time, because you can't go to AA part-time. If you go to AA meetings, you gotta go on a regular basis. I don't know what it is. You have to be reminded about the nature of your disease. You need the support of the group. You know, when you live in a drinking community where just about every social gathering involves alcohol, it's really nice to have a group of support people that understand you're not drinking. Nowadays, nobody cares if you drink or not, by the way, and there's a whole lot of non-alcohol drinks and all those sorts of things. So it's a bit easier than when I sobered up. So we go to Napoleon for a meeting once a week. We go to a meeting once a week here. There's quite a few people. It is anonymous. We, at the bottom of this sheet I'm going to hand out, there's an 800 number and a 701 number to contact for information. It's no secret, it's our phone. We pay for a special line so that you can get information anonymously. How many meetings or groups are there? In the United States, there are 64,541 groups of Alcoholics Anonymous. 1,350,415 members. That's as many as they know because it's anonymous. Worldwide, there's 120,455 groups. Alcoholics Anonymous started in the mid-1930s, and so it's almost 100 years old. And what they discovered with medical, religious, and psychiatry and psychology could not make a dent with alcoholism. A couple guys stumbled across the idea that one alcoholic working with another, supporting each other. There's two guys by the name of Bill and Bob, and they started Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's been going on ever since. It's alcoholics helping alcoholics. That's the way this thing, I think it's the most Christian kind of an organization I've ever seen in my life because it's people helping people. There's no leaders, there's no, no money or nothing like that. We meet at a church somewhere or a hall or wherever, and it's all about recovery, all about spirituality. It's a very spiritual program. AA's own meeting guide materials give a solid order of magnitude for meetings listed. AA's meeting guide page, over 100,000 weekly meetings are currently listed. That's in the United States. The Apple App Store listing for meeting guide has over 150,000 AA meetings are currently listed. Now sometimes that's a group that has like 3 meetings a week and that kind of thing. North Dakota Recovery and AA presence. The North Dakota Alcohol Use Disorder Best State Estimate. According to the latest estimate, North Dakota has 69,000 people age 12 plus with alcohol use disorder. We just call it alcoholism. 69,000 people. The percent estimate, 10.8% of North Dakota residents have alcoholism. That means if there's 20 people in this room, there's probably 2 people that are affected. That's the statistic. By the way, when I was in treatment, we had a lecture one day, and the lecturer said that in 1 year, of the people sitting in this room, there will be statistically 2 people that stay sober. That's how hard it is. When they kicked me out, I decided I was going to be one of those 2, and I did. I stayed sober, by the grace of God, by the way. They eventually accepted me back as an alumni of Heartview. North Dakota AA documents referencing about 150 groups in the state, Area 52. I don't know how big Area 52 is, but 150 groups. Let's see, a few extra stats. About 29,000 people age 12 plus received substance abuse treatment in the past year. This is North Dakota. North Dakota had 64 substance use treatment facilities and 6,295 clients in treatment on a single day. This is a problem. And, I'm telling you all that not to scare you or not to freak you out. You might be affected individually, personally. You might have a family member, you might have a relative, an aunt, an uncle, a parent, a sibling. People I talk to when I share about my recovery and all that sort of thing, like 8 times out of 10 they say, oh yeah, I got a cousin, or I got somebody that I know. And what's unfortunate that there's way more people that are untreated than the people that are treated. And it's a horrible life problem. You cannot have a quality life, you cannot have a quality marriage, you cannot have a quality relationship with anybody if you're in the throes of addiction or alcoholism. So, with all that having been said, you got to wrap up here at the top of the hour, right? Okay. Let's pass these around. I'd like you to have these as handouts. And I would like to ask if there's any questions or any comments, anything that you learned tonight that you didn't know before. Don't be shy. Not real often you're gonna, oh, by the way, at the bottom of the page is a list of phone numbers that you can call and get information. You might have to leave a message because we don't actually answer the phone, it's a service, but.
State to state, like, is there any per capita information as far as?
Other states?
Yeah, like, where do we fall in that?
I have seen some statistics. I could just go to ChatGPT and pull it up. I do know that I did read a statistic. This is not one of the most drinking states, but it ranks up there.
I'm just wondering if it has to do with lack of sunshine in our area, you know what I mean?
Oh, there's
the
environmental factors,
Yeah.
you know, not a lot to do in the wintertime. People sit around, you know, ice fishing and drinking and, you know. One of the things that I know, because we've lived other places, it is very, very much a social, an aspect of social gatherings of just about any kind here, you know. By the way, I was supposed to go on an ambulance transfer tonight at I'm on ambulance call from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. 3 days a week. I didn't tell you that because, you know, the odds are.
They left about 6.
5:30.
Okay.
I got the beep and I called the night guy and I said, look, I gotta give this talk tonight. Can you take the run? And he said, yeah, I can do that. So I got another God wink, you know. I mean, these things work out when they're supposed to. That's why I don't worry about it, you know. But I could have been on a transfer. I'd rather be here with you guys, frankly, than driving to ambulance to Bismarck. Kristen?
Yes, I just want to say, I want to thank you for how you kind of laid this out. I've been around the rooms of AA for a long time, but I wanted to say the numbers at the bottom, we've had actually a few people call and we can talk on the phone, and we have a large building, so there's some private areas that some people just come in and we just talk about it, you know, for an hour or two or whatever, if they have questions. So if you know somebody that has questions, you know, John and I open up our home to help, because it's not something that's educated in school. And my dad was I'll just share briefly if I can. My dad was an alcoholic, and I didn't think I would grow up to be like him. But a lot of times it's learned behavior. That's something I know now. So I didn't even know it was bad or abnormal, but like John said, there's sometimes you cross a line and suddenly you're at a place where once it goes in, your hand just doesn't stop going in. It's weird. I mean, cookies are one of my things. It's not gonna kill me. Alcohol will. I do everything I can to stay supportive. But I want to talk about the phone numbers or just talking to us, because sometimes you have no clue what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. Like when I came to the Catholic Church, they're standing up, sitting down, and doing these prayers, and where's the program? How do I know what I'm supposed to do? So we want to make it kind of easy. It's a comfortable thing because I stopped drinking because I didn't want to lose my kids, my husband, my job, and all those things. And when I came into the rooms just to sit, I don't know if you know the term to audit the class. You kind of go in to see if you want to stay in the class when you're in college. You go, well, I think I might like ceramics, but I don't know what they're going to be doing. So let me go in and check it out for a couple classes. You know, people can do that. They can come and see what it's like. And once I was in these rooms of AA or just talking to somebody, then I kind of got it. I saw people that were like me. They weren't like, I always thought they had to have a booze in a paper bag underneath the bridge, or somewhere around here that just, they can't walk anymore. It's just like, oh, my dad was a very functioning alcoholic. I never saw him tippy-toppy or anything. So, yeah, if there's ever any questions, that's what is important. That's why John's here, to share his experience and our drive to help others, because if I didn't stay stopped drinking, then I could lose everything I have. And it doesn't go away. So I practice our recovery. And so we want to share about it with anybody that has questions, even if you don't know. You're not stigmatized. We wouldn't know who you are if you call or if you come. Privacy is extremely important. So
That's
just wanna share
anonymous.
that. Yeah.
It's hard to be anonymous in a small
And it's hard
town.
to, even adults, we have a hard time saying anonymous. What does that mean? Nobody knows who's in the meetings. For sure.
I know you're gonna have people waiting for you. Any other questions, anybody?
We got a little time.
We do.
I got a quick,
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of peer pressure out there. How do you recommend they stand
That's a great
stern
question.
on that? There's a lot.
Peer pressure. Everybody else is doing it.
Here, take it, and you tell them no 20 times. How do you?
After when I get tired of saying no, I just say, fine.
Fine, I'll do it.
You know, I was 21 when I sobered up. I thought I was a freak. And I had my friends calling up and saying, why don't you come in and party anymore? And I finally had to tell one of my friends, I said, I didn't say it exactly this way, but I said, this alcohol thing had me by the hair, let's put it that way. And I said, I can't do it anymore. And he stopped calling. It takes courage. Sometimes do the right thing. I think that the answer to that question is there's responsible ways of drinking. If your parents have you, give you a drink or whatever, or if it's in a social setting where your parents know what you're doing, that's one thing. But look, I know these small towns. You go out and party and hang with your friends, and somebody brings a little stuff along, and the peer pressure is really hard. But I will tell you something, that the people that firmly say no are more respected than the people that just roll over and say, yeah, what the heck, I mean, look, we're adults, we've been through all that. It got me. I didn't even think about saying no on those days, but I didn't realize that it was inappropriate because it was illegal. I shouldn't have been driving when I was drinking, that's for sure. There's a lot of negative repercussions. Besides, if you get caught as a youth drinking or drunk, that has consequences too, But I don't know what to say other than the fact that people respect people that say no more than you can imagine. It's like they might say, yeah, you're kind of stuck up or whatever. No, I have principles. It doesn't hurt to start developing those at a young age. It's a good question. I don't know how to say other than got to be yourself. And anybody else? Come on, you guys. You must have some question over there.
And it's okay to lose your best friend if they keep peer pressuring you. I think that's probably.
If friends are pressuring you to do something that isn't appropriate, they really aren't good friends. That's what I would say today. I don't care if it's drinking or doing other things that are inappropriate at a young age.
I'll share. When I was a teenager, I had, like I told you, my dad had been drinking, and I came to a place in my life where I didn't feel I had a lot of support, but I was educated in a way that I would be around people that did things, but I knew that I might just not get in trouble, but I don't know how. I think it was a God thing that told me that if I did drugs or drank with them, that I might not make it back. I don't know if that makes some sense. Maybe it was just somehow, even though I didn't know my father did, I was in the 60s and 70s because I'm John's age, and I just had seen and had been educated to know that sometimes the drinking or drugs would take me down to not come back. And so I didn't even want to bother getting in a habit of doing it. And I actually would hang out with a girl that would smoke, the marijuana, and I would just sit with her. And I didn't feel pressure. She didn't pressure me, but I just hung out anyway. And I liked that because, I didn't like what she did, but I still hung out with her and she didn't push me. I mean, I even went to the field with people smoking cigarettes and I didn't smoke and I didn't want to smoke. They said, "You want?" I said, "No, but I'll sit here." So we talk and chat. And I think that's important, that people can honor and respect each other's places and not have a drink or a drug as a qualifier for a friendship. So think about that too, because that's what happened in my life experience. And by the way, when we go to meetings, we just talk about ourselves, of how things go in our lives and what we got through, and without having to do anything about it in a self-destructive way. So
Alcoholics Anonymous has 12 steps, and they are 12 steps of recovery, and they're kind of a successive series of spiritual steps that we take. Number 1 is admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Number 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Step 4 and 5 are inventory steps. It's kind of like confession, but it's a lot deeper. You look at your defects of character and you take a really good hard inside look at yourself. And then the next steps are what we call house cleaning steps, amends steps, and that kind of a thing. And you get down to the 10th step is sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And 11th step is
prayer meditation.
that was
Yeah.
11th step, right.
Inventory.
And then step 12 is having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry the message to other alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So it's a very well thought out series of steps to kind of get us back to ourselves. I think it was very well stated in here about getting us back to what God intended us to be. Useful, contributive members of society, members of our church, members of the culture, members of a family. And I tell you that because if you do stray, there's a way back. And that was the primary message I wanted to carry tonight, other than the fact that God does love you. I want you to know that. I don't know if people told you that lately, but I didn't know that. I really didn't know that. I had to find that out in AA. It took me a long, winding road to get back to the Catholic Church, and I'm really glad I did. I hope you guys never leave, because it's hard to come back. That's all I have. Anybody else?
I'm just gonna share something. When I was growing up, and what scares me now is I look at this group and Mason and his friends, and I was their age, I suppose 14, somebody had a driver's license, but one of my friends at the time, and I don't remember the circumstances or what we were even doing, but she lived on a farm, she drove into town, and she drank so much, we actually got so scared we took her to the doctor's house, because we didn't know what to do. Like, she was passing out, she kind of started convulsing, and we drove to the doctor's driveway, because we were so scared, we didn't know what was going on, and I think part of what's, I don't know if I would have ever drank much in high school, but I didn't touch a drop, honestly, because I saw what she went through. I mean, it was ugly. It was ugly to watch. She was actually throwing up and passed out. We had to tip her over so she wouldn't aspirate. I mean, it was kind of a scary thing at that age, and I'm looking at Mason going, that was probably a year from now, thinking.
You can literally get alcohol poisoning by consuming too much if your system is not used to it. I had a party one time in Napoleon. I was in the 8th grade, and there was a bunch of teenagers that had a party over at some Lockenmeyer house. It was an abandoned house, very nicely done with lanterns and candles and all the booze in the world, beer you could think of. So me and Dwayne Geffrey went over there, and we were invited, and I walked in, and they offered me a beer, and I sucked it down. I'd probably drank a few times before, and then they gave me another one. I started piling these beer cans up, and I had a nice little pyramid going. And the teenagers were coming around and saying, "You drank all that beer?" And I said, "Oh yeah, you know, I was a big shot because I was just a little fella and I was drinking all this beer." I could have died that night. By the time Dwayne Geffrey and I walked over to his house, which is more like crawling down the street, and I got in his basement and I threw up all over the place, which wasn't the worst part. This was Saturday night, and Sunday morning I was expected at Mass. You did not miss Mass. So I go over to Mass, and I know I have my stinky clothes on and my eyes are all red. Back in those days, the women sat on one side of the old church and the men on the other, and the boys in the front and the girls in the front. So I'm in front. I'm thinking I can hide out here. And about halfway through church, I started getting sick. And I had to walk out past everybody, probably reeking of booze. My eyes were bloodshot red. And I went outside and got sick. And I was laying in the back seat of the station wagon when my parents came out. It was one of the most shameful things. Being shamed about it is bad enough. But the truth of the matter is, the amount of alcohol I drank that night, I very well could have poisoned myself. This happens to people. I've talked to enough people in this town who have been sober for a lot of years, like I have. They've stepped over bodies over the years. People that didn't make it. People that, young people that went out drinking and driving and got in an accident. They ain't here no more. And that's not to scare you, but there are real life ramifications like alcohol poisoning. Some people have to literally be pumped out. Some people don't make it. So yeah, it's a very serious problem. You don't realize, and you don't realize how much the body can take. At a young age, a couple of drinks might be too much. You don't know.
Two facts, as they call the disease of alcoholism. You have an allergy of the body and obsession of the mind. Do you want to talk about that, just briefly?
It's pretty much covered in
Okay.
the notes.
Sometimes the
You want it, and your body can't hack it.
Yeah, and sometimes, like this girl, her body might, I realize, reflecting on my drinking history, as we call it, that once I took one drink, I don't remember the rest of the drinks I had, but I know that I don't remember the night. But that was probably because I had a body like hers, which is what he says in here. Some bodies are made differently, and you just don't know if you have that kind or not. So that sometimes can be that allergy. You put one in, and then the body just keeps doing it. I could have water or soda, but for some reason I took the alcohol instead. Or obsession about thinking about, oh, tonight, as adults, I'll get through the day and I'll have a glass of wine tonight. That's that obsession. So other people, I could have it with cookies. Man, I had one tonight. I'm glad I don't have them at home. But it's not the same. It's not going to kill me. But alcohol does. Alcohol can. It's a slow.
You know, at the end of AA meetings, we always stand up, hold hands, and say the Lord's Prayer. Mind if we end that way? You ready? Is it okay if we close?